Pick it up. Say, use your filthy mouth to pick up every single bill for me. If being born as trash means you will always remain trash under my boots. The ear-splitting scream of the young banker tycoon, Arthur Pendelton, echoed through the magnificent hall of the historic London estate. A thick stack of British pound bills was thrown directly into the wrinkled face of the elderly waiter, Alistair. The banknotes flew wildly in the air before falling and scattering all over the polished marble floor. Stopping there, Arthur took a step forward, stomping his shiny leather shoe worth thousands of dollars onto the wrinkled, rough hand of the old man who was trembling as he reached to pick up the money. Sagrada Familia. Laughter erupted from the surrounding crowd of aristocrats. They stood there, holding sparkling crystal champagne flutes, watching this humiliating scene with eyes full of contempt and coldness. Not a single person stepped in to stop it. Not a single person spoke up to protect the poor man who was kneeling on the ground during the ultimate humiliation. But there are truths buried deep in the shadows that no arrogant fool could ever suspect. Let us freeze this brutal moment. Let us rewind time to 3 months ago. At a narrow and damp alleyway on the outskirts of London, La Familia, where the summer rain showers never seemed to end. That was where the old man Alistair lived in a cramped, outdated, but extremely neat, rented apartment. Every day, people saw him quietly walking along the long streets, sweeping up fallen leaves, cleaning up building lobbies with amazing dedication. Old Alistair always wore a gentle, warm smile for the poor, working people around him. He shared his last warm loaf of bread with a homeless child sheltering under a rain canopy. Everyone only knew him as a retired old cleaner, living day by day on a meager pension. They saw him wearing faded jackets with frayed shoulders, walking in leather shoes so worn that the soles were peeling off. They pitied him. They thought he was a loser, on the margins of society, an unfortunate man with no family beside him. No one knew that behind the sad eyes full of crow's feet of that old man was a legendary past. A past closely linked to the rise and fall of the largest financial empires in Europe. That gentle, submissive old Alistair was the very person holding secrets that could blow away any bank in London in a single night. At the same time, at the bustling financial center of London, a new wave of power was rising ruthlessly. Arthur Pendelton, the young executive vice president of the Pendelton Royal Bank, Stanilia, was standing in front of a massive glass window, looking down at the panoramic view of the city. It was the embodiment of the arrogance, greed, and cruelty of the newly emerged elite class. La Familia. He had just been promoted to the executive position thanks to a massive layoff campaign, throwing thousands of long-time employees onto the street without mercy. Arthur, human beings were merely numbers on financial reports. The poor have no right to speak, and the weak only deserve to be eliminated. He had once declared in a board meeting that the bank was not a place for charity. He ruthlessly cut off aid funds for the poor, plus increased interest rates on loans for small households to optimize profits for major shareholders. Arthur's cruelty had driven countless working families into extreme misery, with homes foreclosed and debts piling high. He heard their cries of despair, but only responded with a contemptuous smirk. He was proud to be the one standing on the peak, the one holding the financial lifeblood of millions. Sagrada Familia. His Pendelton family was actively preparing for a major event. It was the annual private charity auction, Familia, gathering the top aristocratic families and tycoons of London. This was not just a place to display wealth, but also an occasion for Arthur to officially announce his plan to acquire the entire network of affiliated banks, consolidating his financial throne. Arthur believed that, after tonight, no one in this country could stand in his path. He frantically prepared everything to absolute perfection. So, from premium wine bottles worth tens of thousands of pounds to the list of the most powerful guests, he had no idea that his ultimate arrogance would lead him straight into an inescapable trap. A trap set up by the very person he regarded as trash under his boots. The grand, historic estate in the heart of London was bathed in the warm, amber glow of massive crystal chandeliers. Outside, a soft, relentless drizzle began to slick the cobblestone driveways. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, aged oak wood, and the subtle, metallic tang of immense wealth. This was the annual private charity auction of the British financial elite. Alistair, dressed in a slightly oversized, faded black waiter's tuxedo with frayed cuffs, walked silently along the edge of the grand ballroom. His steps were completely noiseless, a habit developed over decades of moving through rooms where he was meant to be invisible. His hands, calloused and mapped with deep blue veins, carried a heavy silver tray laden with crystal glasses of vintage champagne. He kept his head lowered, his posture humble, observing the glittering crowd with a quiet, redegnalme. To everyone here, he was just a nameless shadow, for a piece of living furniture hired for £50 a night. Then, the heavy oak doors of the lobby swung open with an arrogant force. Arthur Pendelton stepped into the room. He wore a bespoke, double-breasted, midnight blue suit, tailored to absolute perfection, the diamond-encrusted watch, catching the light of the chandeliers. His eyes swept across the room with a cold, predatory ownership, La Sagrada Familia, looking down at everyone as if they were merely figures on a balance sheet he owned. As Arthur handed his long cashmere overcoat to a young coat-check girl, his eyes landed on Alistair, who was quietly passing by with the tray of champagne. Arthur's lips curled into an immediate, instinctive expression of disgust. To Arthur, the presence of someone so old, so visibly worn out, so obviously belonging to the lower class, was an insult to the purity of his high society event. He took a deliberate step forward, cutting off Alistair's path in the narrow corridor leading to the main hall. Alistair stopped instantly, his head bowed, keeping the silver tray perfectly balanced. "You," Arthur said, his voice dripping with an icy, casual arrogance that cut through the soft classical music in the background. "Who allowed a decrepit, decaying relic like you to serve in a room of this stature?" Alistair did not flinch, his eyes remaining fixed on the polished floor. "I am merely here to assist with the service," sir, Alistair replied, his voice calm, steady, remarkably deep. Arthur let out a sharp, mocking laugh, looking around as if searching for someone to share his amusement. "Service? You look like you belong in a public cemetery, not carrying drinks that cost more than your yearly pension. Get out of my sight before your cheap, pathetic presence ruins my appetite." Alistair did not argue, nor did he show a single spark of anger. He simply bowed his head lower, took a slow step backward into the shadows, let the young tycoon pass. As Arthur walked away, adjusting his silk tie with a smirk of satisfaction, Alistair's eyes followed him. It was not the look of a defeated, broken old man. It was the cold, calculating gaze of a hunter watching a beast walk directly into a snare. The auction hall was a theater of vanity and performative generosity. Wealthy couples sat in plush velvet chairs, casually, bidding tens of thousands of pounds on rare paintings and historical artifacts, not out of love for art, but to display their financial dominance. Oh, Arthur sat in the very front row, his posture dominant, his arm draped casually over the back of his chair. Every time a bid was raised, he would raise his gold paddle with a theatrical flourish, driving the prices to ridiculous heights just to hear the crowd gasp in awe. £50,000. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the microphone. "Sold to Mr. Arthur Pendelton of the Pendelton Royal Bank." The room erupted into polite, synchronized applause. Arthur turned slightly to nod at his peers, asking in the shallow warmth of their admiration. Meanwhile, Alistair continued his grueling work in the background. The silver tray grew heavier with each passing hour, a metal digging into his aching wrists. But he did not complain, carrying dirty glasses back to the kitchen and returning with fresh trays of delicacies. Arthur, however, was not finished with him. As the night wore on and the champagne flowed, Arthur's desire to assert his absolute authority grew more intense. He wanted a spectacle, a demonstration of his power, to impress a group of foreign billionaire investors who were sitting at his table. He caught Alistair's eye from across the room and raised a finger, summoning the old man like a dog. Alistair walked over, his face an emotionless mask, holding a fresh tray of expensive red wine. "My guests are thirsty, old man," Arthur said loudly, ensuring everyone at the table could hear him. "You are moving far too slowly." Perhaps those ancient, rotting legs, those of yours, can no longer support the weight of your poverty. One of the foreign investors laughed nervously, but Arthur only grinned, emboldened by the audience. He reached out and took a glass from the tray. But as he did, he deliberately tipped his hand, causing the deep red liquid to spill over the edge. The wine dripped down the side of the glass, staining the pristine white tablecloth. Look at what you've done. Arthur suddenly roared, his face twisting into a mask of theatrical outrage. You clumsy, incompetent fool. You've ruined the table. You nearly ruined my bespoke suit. Foy. The entire table fell silent, the neighboring guests turning their heads to watch the drama unfold. Alistair stood perfectly still, his silver tray steady, his eyes looking directly into the furious, mocking eyes of the young billionaire. I apologize, sir, Alistair said softly, but my hand did not shake. Arthur's eyes narrowed, his pride stung by the old man's calm lack of fear. Are you calling me a liar, you worthless peasant? Arthur hissed, leaning forward until he was inches from Alistair's face. You are a servant. You exist to serve, to apologize, and to be whatever I say you are. Although. Now, clean this up before I ensure you never find a job sweeping streets in this city again. Alistair quietly took a linen napkin from his pocket, bent down, and began to dab at the spilled wine on the table, his movements slow and dignified. Arthur watched him, cruel, satisfied smile returning to his face as he prepared to deliver the ultimate blow. The tension in the grand ballroom of the London estate was now thick enough to cut with a knife. All eyes were locked onto the small table where the young billionaire, Arthur Pendelton, sat. Alistair, the old waiter, was still holding the silver tray, his knuckles white, but his posture steady. Arthur's face contorted into a snarl of pure, restrained malice, his pride wounded by the old man's refusal to show fear. You think you can look at me like that? Arthur hissed, his voice rising, Lilia carrying across the silent hall. You are a biological error, a stain on the floor of this establishment. The swift, violent flick of his wrist. Arthur deliberately struck the bottom of the silver tray Alistair was holding. The heavy tray flipped instantly. The remaining crystal glasses of deep red Cabernet Sauvignon shattered on the marble floor. A sharp, violent sound of breaking glass echoed through the high-vaulted ceiling. The dark, red liquid splashed aggressively, soaking the cuff of Alistair's faded trousers and spreading across the white marble like a pool of fresh blood. Look at this mess, Arthur roared, standing up, his towering figure casting a dark shadow over the bent-over old man. Look at what your pathetic, trembling hands have done to this historic hall. You clumsy, useless dog. From his breast pocket, Arthur pulled out a thick, heavy stack of British pound sterling bills. The crisp paper notes caught the bright light of the crystal chandeliers. A cold, mocking grin. So, Arthur tore the paper band, holding the stack together. Then he raised his hand and flung the cash directly into Alistair's face. Paper bills struck the old man's wrinkled cheeks, fluttering through the air like dying leaves, before settling into the puddle of spilled red wine on the wet floor. "Pick them up," Arthur screamed, pointing a finger at the ground. "Shall I use your filthy mouth to pick up each and every one of these bills for me? Say, born trash, you'll forever remain trash under my heel." Alistair slowly knelt down on one knee, his old joints popping softly to pick up the soaked bills. But as his hand reached out, Arthur took a heavy step forward. He brought the heel of his polished $1,000 Italian leather shoe down directly onto Alistair's wrinkled, scarred hand. He ground his heel down, pressing Alistair's fingers hard into the cold, hard marble and the broken glass. A sharp gasp went through the crowd of aristocrats. No one moved to help. They only watched, a grasa familia, smiles of amusement and curiosity playing on their wealthy faces. To them, the old man's pain was nothing more than a free theatrical performance. For a few long, suffocating seconds, Alistair did not move. He remained on one knee, his hand trapped beneath the heavy leather shoe of the young billionaire. He did not cry out. He did not beg for mercy. The absolute silence coming from the old man was far more terrifying than any scream of pain. Then, slowly, Alistair raised his head. The tired, submissive look in his eyes was completely gone. In its place was a gaze of absolute, freezing authority, cold, sharp, and heavy as a mountain. Arthur felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine, his foot freezing in place. Alistair slowly pulled his hand out from under Arthur's shoe. Despite the pressure, his fingers were steady, not a single tear falling from his eyes. He stood up. He did not brush the dirt or the red wine from his trousers. He simply stood at his full height, his spine straightening with a natural dignity that made his cheap, faded tuxedo look like a royal robe. The aura of a simple, broken servant vanished instantly. Alistair reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He did not pull out a weapon or a cloth to clean the floor. Instead, he pulled out a very old, scratched, but functioning button key mobile phone. It was an ancient device, completely out of place in this room of high-tech luxury. Alistair dialed a number from memory and pressed the call button. He placed the phone to his ear, his eyes locked onto Arthur's face, which was starting to pale under the intensity of the old man's gaze. The call connected in less than a second. "Is Alistair," the old man said, his voice deep, resonant, and dripping with an absolute, terrifying power. "The inspection is over. The current leadership of the Pendelton Royal Bank is toxic, arrogant, and unfit to control a single penny of our capital. Revoke Arthur Pendelton's status immediately. Destroy his family's entire credit network before sunrise. Like, do it now. So Amelia, Alistair lowered the phone and pressed the end call button. He did not say another word. He stood there, surrounded by the broken glass and the spilled wine, waiting for the storm to strike. Arthur let out a loud, nervous laugh, trying to mask the sudden fear clawing at his chest. It was that old man. Arthur sneered, looking at his friends. Are you calling your nurse to take you back to the asylum? You a whore. But before his friends could laugh, the heavy double doors of the ballroom burst open. The heavy, gold-plated double doors of the grand ballroom did not just open. They were flung backward with an immense, commanding force that made the giant crystal chandeliers above tremble. A dozen men in tailored, charcoal, gray suits marched into the room. Their faces were grim, their movements synchronized, exuding the cold, heavy authority of federal safety regulators and high-level enforcement agents. At the center of this formidable entourage was an elderly gentleman with silver hair, wearing a bespoke pinstripe suit that cost more than Arthur's entire car collection. It was Edward Vance, the global chief executive officer and chairman of the board of the Pendelton Financial Group. Arthur's breath hitched in his throat, his arrogant smirk evaporating instantly. Mr. Vance, Arthur stammered, his voice losing its powerful edge, suddenly sounding thin and desperate. What are you doing here? This is a private, exclusive event. Edward Vance did not even glance at Arthur. Instead, he walked straight past the young billionaire, his leather shoes clicking sharply on the wet marble floor. He stopped directly in front of Alistair. The absolute horror and utter disbelief of every aristocrat in the room, most powerful CEO in the British banking sector, took a deep and respectful bow. Lord Alistair, Edward Vance said, his voice carrying clearly through the dead silence of the hall. The emergency directive has been received and executed. The board of directors has been convened. We have acted on your absolute authority. A collective gasp swept through the crowd of wealthy elites. Lord Alistair, Arthur gasped, his face turning an ash-gray color, his hands starting to shake violently. Oh no, this is impossible. He is just an old, clumsy waiter. He sweeps the streets. Edward Vance finally turned his head, his eyes locking onto Arthur with a look of pure, easy contempt. You arrogant, blind fool. Vance spat, his voice cutting like a razor. You stand in the presence of Alistair Pendelton, founding architect of the very bank you run. The man who owns 40% of our global shares, sole owner of the land this very estate is built upon. He is the ghost maker. He placed your family in power. He is the only reason your name exists on our letterhead. Fe. Sagrada Familia. Arthur felt the ground beneath him dissolve as the truth struck him like a physical blow. The old man he had insulted, therefore he had forced to crawl on the floor, was the absolute ruler of his entire world. You see, Alistair stood in the center of the room, the bright light of the chandeliers reflecting in his calm, unyielding eyes. He did not look at Arthur with anger. He looked at him with the cold indifference of a judge, delivering a final, undeniable sentence. Arthur, Alistair said softly. His voice had the weight of an iron hammer. Yes, Sagrada Familia. You believed. Your wealth gave you the right to strip others of their dignity. No, Kawa. You believed. Those who serve you are nothing more than dirt under your expensive boots. So, oh, let us see how much dignity you possess when you have nothing left. Yeah. Edward Vance stepped forward, pulling a high-tech tablet from his assistant's hands. A direct executive order of the chairman, Vance announced, looking at the crowd. Arthur Pendelton is hereby stripped of all executive titles, effective immediately. All personal and corporate bank accounts under the Pendelton Bank umbrella belonging to Arthur Pendelton and his immediate family have been frozen. Our legal department has initiated a full forensic audit into your personal expenses and transaction history. Arthur's phone in his pocket began to vibrate furiously. He pulled it out with trembling hands, staring at the screen as alert after alert flashed in bright, terrifying red. Account froyosina. Red it line terminated. Asset liquidation initiated. No, no, please. You can't do this. Arthur screamed, dropping his phone onto the wet marble floor. It cracked right next to a soaked banknote. Sagrada Familia. He looked around at the billionaire investors he had been boasting to just minutes ago. But they all turned their heads away, their faces blank, erasing him from their lives in an instant. Security, Edward Vance commanded coldly. Remove this trespasser from the property. Two of the large security guards, as Alistair had worked alongside, stepped forward. They grabbed Arthur by his tailored midnight blue sleeves, pinning his arms behind his back with an aggressive force. Let me go. Do you know who I am? Arthur shrieked, kicking and thrashing as he was dragged across the polished floor. La Sagrada Familia. The very crowd that had laughed at Alistair now watched in complete silence as Arthur was dragged out like a piece of worthless garbage. His expensive leather shoes left long, dark streaks on the wet marble, a pathetic trail of his fallen empire. Outside the grand London estate, a soft drizzle had transformed into a violent, icy downpour. The cold rain swept through the dark streets, washing away the warmth of the summer evening. Arthur Pendelton lay sprawled on the wet, the asphalt, just outside the towering wrought iron gates of the property. His bespoke, midnight blue suit was now soaked, stained with dark grease and street grime. His expensive silk tie was torn, clinging to his neck like a wet rag. The two security guards who had dragged him out stood just inside the gate, their arms crossed, watching him with cold, expressionless eyes. Arthur looked up through the blinding rain, his vision blurred, his hands scraping against the rough pavement. Right there, floating in a shallow, muddy puddle, were the very paper bills he had thrown at Alistair inside the warm ballroom. They were soaked with dirty rainwater, covered in black road, silt, and dead leaves. Arthur's trembling fingers reached out, clawing at the wet paper, desperately trying to pull the dirty money toward his chest. The young billionaire, who once refused to touch anything that wasn't pristine, was now shivering on his knees, desperately trying to gather soaked, ruined cash from the mud. At that moment, the heavy gates slowly creaked open. Pristine, gold-plated Rolls-Royce silently rolled out of the driveway, its headlights cutting through the dark rain like two golden swords. The car stopped right in front of Arthur, splashing a wave of dirty water over his face. He did not even try to wipe it away. The tinted passenger window of the luxury vehicle slowly rolled down. Alistair sat in the back seat, now wearing a dry, elegant charcoal coat, looking out at the ruined young man with a quiet, solemn dignity. I really remember this night, Arthur, Alistair said, his voice calm, clear, cutting through the sound of the falling rain. Money can buy you a seat at any table, but it can never buy you a single ounce of human decency. You stripped others of their dignity because you believed your wealth made you a god. Say, la Sagrada Familia. You are the one kneeling in the mud, begging for scraps. Eda. Arthur opened his mouth to scream, to beg, to apologize. But no sound came out, only a pathetic, silent gasp as his tears mixed with the freezing rain. The window rolled up smoothly, and the Rolls-Royce quietly accelerated into the dark, leaving Arthur alone in the freezing rain, now holding a handful of wet, worthless paper. But as we watch this young tycoon lose everything, we must look beyond his ruined life. We must look at the crowd that stood inside that warm, golden ballroom. People who laughed when Alistair was humiliated. People who watched a fellow human being get stepped on and chose to remain silent. If you were standing in that room tonight, what would you have done? Would you have stood there, sipping your champagne, pretending not to see? Or would you have had the courage to speak up for an old man who had nothing? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support real justice.